So I think this is going to be a video that a lot of people are going to be curious about. This is my one season review of the Sportiva G-Tech. So the G-Tech released in, I think it was November of 2022, along with a lot of other things that's in the fall release line. So this released right before the 2022 and 2023 ice climbing season, and I got my hands on them before I got to ice climbing them. And then I did make a review where it was like first few impressions or first few days or whatever. This video is a whole season of use. So I've used these pretty much every time I've been out to ice climb. There's only been one day that I used the G5 Evo, and after that day I basically said that I won't ever wear the G5 Evo again. I like the G-Tech a lot. There's a lot of reasons why I like them, but I think, overall, they are just a great boot, and it speaks to their design and why I like them so much. So after a whole season of use, here's what I've kind of noticed about the G-Tech. For one, they are probably one of the best boots that I've used for sensitivity on ice, and that seems kind of a weird thing to say because this isn't like a rock shoe. Like with a rock shoe, you can feel the edges that you're standing on, and you get like a more sensitive shoe you have, the more you can get an idea for what you're standing on. That seems silly to say when you're talking about ice climbing because you have a crampon that's strapped onto your boot and there isn't really any sensitivity. But what I found with these compared to the G5 Evo is that they handle better, and they are slightly more sensitive to where you can feel like if ice is going to blow underneath your feet. There's kind of like a feeling that you get from the ice where you're a little bit more insecure on it. With these, it was pretty easy to tell when that ice was going to blow and when it's a good piece of ice that you're standing on. So that was really much more appreciated with these. But the flip side to that too is that these boots made me go to monopoints. The first time I climbed in these boots, I did dual points. I had dual points set up with my crampons from last season, and I just carried them over. At first, I didn't like it. I felt like they were too far outwards. It just felt weird to be on dual. So the next time I went out to climb, I immediately switched to monos, and I led that day, and I felt fine. Like they felt really good. And I had only experimented with monos like twice last season, and I didn't like them. But these boots gave me more confidence in the monos just because I feel like I could feel more. And I think that does have to do with just the construction of the boot, because if you look at this boot, it's a pretty low volume boot. It's not this massive beefy boot like the G5 Evo or other types of boots. It's a very like bare bones, minimal, slimmed down boot that really handles a lot. It handles a lot really well. And I think it's just because it's not this big bulky boot where you get more sensitivity, but you get so much more from it because it isn't a massive boot. The G5 Evo, for example, in my mind, it's a very old style construction of boots from Sportiva. They are kind of like these massive boots, like the Nepal cubes and all that. They're big chunky boots. They're boots that have looked relatively the same over the past 20 years. And I think the G5 Evo and the G2 Evo kind of fit that same silhouette. They're a bigger construction boot, they're heavier, they're clunky, but they're supportive. Whereas these boots kind of change everything, but it also makes sense because these are based on like the last and kind of the basic design of the Equilibriums. When the Equilibriums came out, they were kind of a bigger deal because the Equilibriums kind of broke the standards of what a three-season mountaineering boot should be and what a trekking boot should be. It kind of broke all the standards, and it proved to be really well. It proved to be really well. And I feel like that's the same thing with the G-Tech, is that these G-Techs kind of break that barrier down, and they really show what they're really capable of and how much you actually need versus what you thought you need. So yeah, I think they perform way better than the G5 Evo. And normally when you're dealing with a boot that's so low volume and so low weight, I've done a video where I compare them to the Scarpa Phantom Tech. I think they broke down to the G-Techs were 100 grams lighter, and that was a big deal. There's a lot of concern that because these are so lightweight, they aren't as warm. And while that's kind of true, I find that it really wasn't. In my use, and my use is my own use. You know, everyone's foot temperature is kind of different. You know, everyone's conditions are kind of different. What I found here in the Northwest, using this for ice climbing, whether it be super cold days, climbing out in negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, whether it be in super wet days, they've performed just as good and even better than the G5 Evo in my use. Every time I use the G5 Evo, my feet would get kind of cold. And I think it was just due to the clunkiness of the boot. Whereas these are just, they're lighter weight, they have less foot fatigue, but they feel more precise. And another kind of thing to get into with the difference between them is I feel like over the last 2 years, because the G5 Evo released in 2020 and these came out in 2022. I feel like within the 2 years of difference, the BOA technology for these boots have gotten way better. It could just be my G5 Evo boots, but I don't think it is. I constantly find that I always have to tighten my BOA dial on my G5 Evo. When I tighten it before I climb, and when I climb, and when I get down, the boot's kind of loose. These boots, I tighten them at the vehicle or at the base of the climb. The whole day they are at the same tightness, and I think that's why I think they perform better for me, is that I'm not in this constant state of over tightening them and they're really loose, and then this constant game of just trying to find the best fit with them. I tighten them from the beginning of the day, and they work just great. I really do think the BOA technology in these boots has gotten way better, and I think they excel from that. So for my personal standpoint, these are way better because I'm not over tightening them and then cutting off circulation. I mean, I did in the G5 Evo, I got the screaming barfies in my toes, and that was an experience where I haven't had any of those days with these. Now, sure, I've had cold days in them. Everyone has a cold day because they're a single boot. That's kind of, when you're in the kind of cold weather for a long period of time. I mean, the day that my feet got kind of cold, I was out in the conditions for a long time. It's bound to happen. That's why double boots exist, and that's why they still continue to play a place. I will just briefly mention here is that there is a boot coming out at the end of this year, 2023. It's going to be called the G Summit. I've done a little information video on it, basically, and I kind of just talk about some specs and kind of theorize about it. Basically, the G-Tech is going to be essentially the same silhouette as, or the G Summit was going to be the same silhouette as the G-Tech, but it's going to be a double boot. It'll have a liner. It'll have an insole you can use. My kind of guess is that it's going to be like the G-Tech, but you have the addition or the ability to add a liner, and I think that boot's going to be super versatile. That's just kind of a side tangent, but that kind of goes to my point, is that of course you're going to deal with cold days and cold feet, because at the end of the day, these still are a single boot. There's only so much you can do with a single boot. It doesn't matter if it's the G-Tech. The Scarpa Phantom Techs are going to get just as cold on any cold day. The G5 Evo are going to get just as cold on any cold day. There always reaches a certain point of when your feet are going to be cold. If you're out in very cold conditions for a long amount of time, your feet are going to get cold. It's inevitable. But what I found was, based on the last season of using the G5 Evo and then this season of using the G-Tech, I found that my feet were warmer in the G-Tech. So I think that accredits for the performance that I've seen this year is just due to the superior fit. And I think that's what it is for me. These are, like I said, based on the equilibrium. They have the equilibrium last, and that last fits me really well. It's a narrow construction towards the heel where it widens out just a bit in the forefoot. It's perfect for me because it's also low volume. I have a very low volume foot, and this boot works perfect for me. Whereas the G5 Evo, they're based on the Nepal last. So if you have a high volume foot, that will work for you. But because I have a low volume foot, there's too much boot for me, and it just doesn't work as well. And these I definitely feel are better. but again, that is based on the last. But other than that, performance is pretty much the same between them. I actually feel like these perform better just because you have so many better gains, because you do have a lighter weight boot. You have way less foot fatigue, and like I said, you do get kind of this, more sensitivity towards it. But that's not all you gain from these boots, is that these boots are probably one of the most walkable boots I've ever used. And I've used a couple different mountaineering boots. I've used mountaineering boots that were like my first season of ice climb. I used mountaineering boots that were from the 90s. It was an old pair of Solomon mountaineering boots, and then my second pair was the G5 Evo, and then this. I love approaching in these boots. I've done 6-mile hike with tools with these boots. I love them. They work really well for approaching. They work really good for bushwhacking. They give you still a solid platform, but it just has a little bit, like when I say a little bit more give, like it's so slight, but just that little bit of give makes it for a more walkable boot. I've always felt like walking in mountaineering boots was like walking in ski boots. They're very like much of a platform, and they're clunky, like they're awkward to walk in. Whereas with these, you pretty much go through the same motions as just a regular hiking boot. And kind of part of that is due to, it's kind of different sole construction. This is based on, like I said, the Equilibrium. It's got like the Equilibrium heel, which has a little bit of cushion into it. It's got like spring load technology, so you get a little bit bounce back. That's all super nice, but they're just a really walkable boot. And like I said, there's just a tiny bit of give. They're still mountaineering boots at the end of the day, and they're not going to give. So they are a really walkable boot. They're super comfortable to walk in. What I do is I don't even tighten the bow dial down for my approaches. I just leave the bow undone and just have this strap up here done around my ankle area, and I approach in that way, and it works fine. It keeps my feet comfortable, and they're not too sloppy, and they work really well. So I really love these boots for the approaches. And then I think a bigger area of concern with going to a lighter weight boot is I think inevitably you're going to have this concern of, is the boot going to handle what is thrown at it? Like, how is the durability of it? So far, the durability has been really good. I've noticed probably the same amount of wear as the G5 Evo, maybe a little bit less. I mean, the sole is in pretty good condition still. There's a couple areas of wear, but I think that's just due to a little bit softer of a rubber compound. The G5 Evo used Vibram Mont, which is their mountaineering blend. I think it's changed now. It's a different name, but it used to be called Vibram Mont. Whereas this one goes with 2 different compounds. I mentioned that in one of my other videos on the G-Tech. So they're just a little bit softer of a compound, so wear is going to be more noticeable. But after hiking a lot and doing a lot in these boots, they still are in great condition. The sole's in great condition. Been super happy to have them. I'm super happy that these boots are kind of the new standard single boot for Sportiva. And yeah, it's been overall a great time with them. So that is my 1-season review of the La Sportiva G-Tech. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.